the question that has echoed for centuries. Is God dead? Silence is the first answer. A silence that echoes through the mountains of the soul, the empty halls of reason, and the abandoned sanctuaries of the modern heart. And in that silence, a question emerges not as a whisper, but as a scream muffled by time. Is God dead? This question, laden with pain, doubt, and despair, is not new. It has resonated since the dawn of human consciousness. It was whispered by prisoners in dark chambers, wept by mothers on war-torn fields, and debated by philosophers in candlelit cafes. It reflects a humanity that looks to the heavens and sometimes finds only emptiness. But this is not a question that seeks a simple answer. It is a door, and every door leads somewhere. What truly lies behind it? Is it the absence of God, or our own spiritual deafness? The doubt about God's existence reveals less about God and more about ourselves. It points to the abyss between the visible and the invisible, between the rational and the mysterious. In this video, we won't try to prove or disprove. We won't defend dogmas or attack beliefs. Here, we will explore. Like ancient travelers, we will unfold forgotten maps, read invisible scrolls, and descend into the deepest corners of the human spirit. Because maybe God is not dead. Maybe he never was. Maybe it was us who got lost from him. And so, we begin the journey. Nietzsche, the controversial phrase, and its true hidden meaning, God is dead. 3 words, 1 sentence. An earthquake in the soul of the West. The phrase was written by Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most misunderstood thinkers, and ironically, one of the most spiritually provocative. But what did Nietzsche really mean? Contrary to popular belief, Nietzsche wasn't celebrating the death of God. He was mourning it. He proclaimed, like a modern prophet, a void settling into the heart of civilization. The God who was dying wasn't necessarily the supreme being, but the traditional idea of God, built over centuries, often shaped by rigid dogmas, oppressive institutions, and outdated moralism. In his book, The Gay Science, Nietzsche describes a madman running through the streets, lantern in hand in broad daylight, shouting, "I seek God, I seek God. God is dead, and we have killed him." Nietzsche wasn't talking about a literal death, but a symbolic one. In his view, modern reason, scientific progress, materialism, and growing nihilism extinguished the sacred flame in the human heart. We killed God when we replaced direct spiritual experience with theory, when we forgot mystery and clung only to what could be measured. But Nietzsche also understood the weight of this act. He foresaw what would come next, a world without absolutes, a humanity lost, drowning in relativism and searching for meaning. It was a warning, a philosophical outcry, because for him, the death of God was not an end, but the beginning of a new era, a dangerous era where man would have to learn to become his own creator of meaning or fall into madness. And at the core of this often repeated phrase, we find something even more unsettling. Nietzsche didn't kill God. He was looking for him amid the ruins. What he saw was a void we are still trying to fill today. The death of God as a symbol of modern spiritual crisis. The death of God, as expressed by Nietzsche, wasn't just a philosophical phrase. It was the diagnosis of a spiritual wound, an open wound in the soul of the West, because what really died was meaning. In the ancient world, the idea of God, whether Yahweh, Brahman, Logos, or the D offered more than a religious belief. It was structure, foundation, direction. The divine wasn't just something worshipped. It was the gravitational center of reality, the axis around which morality, art, knowledge, and human identity revolved. But with modernity, something broke. The advance of exact sciences, extreme rationalism, and the disenchantment of the world, as Max Weber called it, stripped existence of its hidden magic. God ceased to be a living presence in daily life and began to be seen by many as an outdated myth, a relic of pre-scientific times. But in tearing down the sacred, we put nothing in its place. The result was a civilization increasingly empty, though technologically advanced. A world full of technical answers, but increasingly silent on existential questions. A humanity capable of exploring galaxies, but no longer knowing why it gets out of bed. It is in this abyss that mass depression, existential angst, and rampant consumerism emerge, desperate attempts to fill a void that may, in fact, be the absence of the divine. The symbolic death of God created a spiritual crisis, because without an absolute north, each person creates their own and the world fragments. We are surrounded by information, but thirsty for wisdom. We have freedom, but don't know what to do with it. We are free, but free for what? Perhaps more than ever, we are ready to rediscover the sacred not as doctrine, but as living experience. Because the human spirit, though wounded, still longs for meaning. And maybe God never died. He was simply silenced by the noise of the modern world. The existential void in a world without transcendence. Imagine a clock that has lost its main hand. It still works, still ticks, but it's forever off course. That's the modern world without transcendence. We keep going, producing, consuming, connecting, but without knowing where or why. We live in an age of speed, but not of direction. Existential emptiness may be the greatest silent epidemic of our time. It doesn't show up with fever or cough, but with apathy, anxiety, and a deep feeling that something is missing, even when everything seems to be in place. This emptiness is born when humans lose contact with the eternal. When everything is reduced to matter, logic, and utility, and the mystery of existence is dismissed as superstition. When life is measured only in goals, status, and productivity, the sacred dissolves, and what's left is a vague sense of incompleteness. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and concentration camp survivor, observed that the loss of meaning leads people to extreme despair. He called it the existential vacuum, a kind of hole in the soul created by the absence of ultimate purpose. And it is in this vacuum that addictions, endless pleasure-seeking, and attachment to distractions often arise. Without transcendence, life becomes a series of numbing routines. The great questions, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Are shelved, replaced by notifications and bills. But here's a secret. This void is not the end. It is a calling, a reminder that behind appearances, there is something more. Something that cannot be bought or explained, only experienced. Because the human being wasn't born just to survive, but to connect with the invisible, to touch the eternal through the finite. And as long as that connection is absent, the heart will continue to cry out, even in silence, for something the modern world forgot to offer: the presence of the sacred, the return of the sacred. Why God never left despite modern silence. Despite academic denial, despite the endless noise of machines and screens, the sacred never stopped whispering. God is not dead. He merely went into hiding. And not out of revenge, nor judgment, but because the human mind, so full of certainties and distractions, forgot how to listen. In recent years, even as churches empty and religions lose followers, something unexpected is happening. There's a silent return to mystery. People are once again seeking the spiritual not through old formulas, but in meditation, retreats, esoteric studies, psychedelic experiences, synchronicities that feel like messages. We are rediscovering what never actually left us. The sacred does not need stone temples. It lives in a stranger's gaze, in the contemplation of a sunset, in the deep silence between two heartbeats. It is in the art that moves us, the music that lifts us, the moment we feel there is something beyond this body and this world. God did not hide. We became distracted, but the soul has memory, and it recognizes the divine even beneath the rubble of logic. That's why even at the height of materialism, we still long for something greater, a purpose, a presence, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstance. The return of the sacred is not a religious phenomenon. It's psychological, existential, human. It's the moment we realize that no matter how much we possess, something essential is still missing. And so we begin to seek again. And in seeking, we begin to find again. Because God never left. He was simply waiting for the silence required to be heard. God as consciousness, not an anthropomorphic figure for centuries. We were taught to imagine God as an external being, a bearded old man seated on a heavenly throne, watching our actions and deciding our fate. But that image is a metaphor, a human attempt to make the incomprehensible comprehensible. However, the deepest spiritual traditions from east to west, from Hermeticism to Christian mysticism, have always pointed beyond form. God is not a powerful man in the sky. God is pure consciousness, not one consciousness among others, but the foundation of all consciousness. The silent presence behind thought, the observer that perceives without judgment, the fertile emptiness from which all things arise. God is the invisible backdrop where the theater of life unfolds. The Hindu mystic Ramana Maharshi said, "God is closer to you than your own breath." And Jesus, when he said, "The kingdom of God is within you," was speaking of this same inner reality, not a geographic location, but a dimension of experience. When we understand God as consciousness, everything changes. We stop seeking him outside and begin to recognize him in everything. In sunlight on the skin, in the breath flowing in and out, in the silent awareness observing our fears and desires. This God does not offend, does not punish, and does not need to be convinced. He simply is, and is present in all that is. This view doesn't eliminate the mystery, it expands it. God ceases to be a character and becomes the very stage upon which existence unfolds. He ceases to be a belief and reveals himself as direct experience. And so the question changes. No longer, does God exist? But, are you aware of awareness itself? Because perhaps, in truly knowing yourself, you are beginning to know God, the human mind, and the ancestral search for meaning. From the moment humans first looked up at the sky and asked, "What are those lights?" a restlessness was born that has never left us. What is the meaning of all this? More than food, shelter, or safety, what we have always truly sought, from the first campfires to Earth-orbiting satellites, is meaning. The human mind cannot tolerate existential emptiness. We are symbolic beings, made to interpret, to turn chaos into narrative, to find meaning even in pain. That's why in every culture, age, and civilization, we find myths, gods, rituals, and sacred stories. From forest shamans to Greek philosophers, from whirling dervishes to medieval alchemists, all, in some way, sought the same thing, to understand their place in the mystery of existence. This search is not a sign of weakness. It is a spiritual instinct. Science can explain the how of things, but it is the sacred that points us toward the why. And when that why disappears, nihilism arises, along with depression, and the sense that everything is random, therefore meaningless. But that is unnatural, because even those who claim to believe in nothing, believe in something. In love, in justice, in freedom, in art. And all of these are expressions of the soul trying to give form to the invisible. God, in this context, is not merely a being, but the ultimate answer the soul intuits, even when the mouth denies it. And perhaps our thirst for meaning is, in fact, the echo of God within us, because the seeker, and that which is sought, may deep down be the same. Science, the universe, and signs of intelligence beyond matter for centuries. Science has aimed to decipher the universe's secrets through reason, experimentation, and math. And it has gone far, very far. We've mapped DNA, sent probes to other planets, and uncovered invisible particles. But as we've delved deeper into the fabric of reality, something surprising began to emerge. Order, precision, harmony. A universe that seems more like a carefully composed symphony than a chaotic accident. Cosmic constants like gravitational force or the charge of the electron have values so precise that if they were even slightly different, life would be impossible. It's as if the universe was calibrated with intention. This apparent fine-tuning intrigues even the most skeptical physicists. Some propose multiverses to explain it. Others admit maybe there's an intelligence behind it all. DNA, for example, is a coded biological alphabet that stores information like a book. And where there's a code, there's usually an author. Quantum mechanics, meanwhile, defies traditional logic. Particles behave differently when observed, as if consciousness were involved. So, the more science explores the universe, the more it encounters mystery. And perhaps that mystery is not a miscalculation. Perhaps it is the subtle trace of something that has always been there, an intelligence beyond matter. Mystical experiences. When the divine manifests beyond logic at times, reality seems to open a rift. Time slows. The mind silences. And then something profound unfolds. Mystics, meditators, saints, artists, they all describe experiences that transcend logic and words. A deep sense of unity with everything. A love that defies description. An inner light that seems to come from nowhere, yet emanates from everywhere. These experiences are not dogmas, and they don't require altars. They happen in nature, during prayer, in dreams, or in chaos. They are encounters with the ineffable, something that, though unprovable, feels more real than anything seen. Psychology calls them peak experiences. Mysticism calls them ecstasy, illumination, samdhi. All point in one direction. Beyond the self, something calling. And those who've experienced them rarely return as they were, because for a moment, they touched the infinite. The death of the ego and the birth of the divine within. The ego, our mental identity builder, separates, isolates. But what if God wasn't out there, but inside us, waiting for the ego's silence? In deep meditation, trauma, or peak experiences, the ego can collapse. When it does, something else emerges. Not emptiness, but presence. A unity and unconditional love beyond thought. A profound presence as if something deeper within us has awoken the divine seed, the higher self. True spiritual awakening might not be learning something new, but remembering what we were before forgetting. Synchronicity, purpose, and the invisible field of reality. Have you ever thought of someone and they called? Found the meaningful phrase you needed exactly when needed? Carl Jung called these meaningful coincidences synchronicities. They're not accidents, but clues. Signals that there's an invisible field weaving reality with intention. Quantum physics hints at deep connectivity entanglement, non-locality, unified fields. Cause and effect aren't linear, but a living web. In that field, thoughts, emotions, and intentions resonate. The more aligned you are with your purpose, the more synchronicities appear. Perhaps destiny isn't fixed, but a dance between consciousness and cosmic intelligence. Maybe we are guided even without knowing it. Religion versus spirituality. Where God truly dwells, religions were born to connect humans to the sacred. But with time, many temples became prisons. Dogma, hierarchy, control. Religion is structure. Spirituality is experience. The sacred isn't in recited words, but in quiet presence. In art that moves us, in compassion unprompted, in the gratitude felt without reason. The sacred left the palaces and moved into the everyday. Perhaps God never lived in temples, but in the hearts of those who seek sincerely. God in Eastern philosophy, the all, the void, the unity. In Western tradition, God is often portrayed as an entity with will and judgment. In Eastern traditions, the picture is different. For Taoists, God is the Tao, the nameless flow that moves everything. For Hindus, Brahman the universal consciousness permeating all. In Buddhism, the discussion isn't about a god, but accessing the void, not absence, but infinite potential. God isn't a being above, but the very fabric of reality. Separation vanishes. Everything is one. A drop realizes it is the ocean, and in that realization, it becomes the entire ocean. Why the idea of God disturbs the modern world? We live in an age that worships reason, data, science. That's valuable. But we've lost contact with mystery. Talking about God now feels uncomfortable. Many see it as superstition or emotional immaturity. But why? Because the idea of God reminds us of our lack of control, of something greater, of responsibility. For a modern ego that wants to be the center, that's intolerable. So many deny, mock, or ignore, not because God doesn't exist, but because acknowledging him would change everything. If God is alive, are we ready to listen? Maybe the deeper question isn't, does God exist? But if he is here, now, do we have ears to hear? God may speak in silence, in intuition, in unlikely coincidence, in tears, in inexplicable chills. But we're so distracted, immersed in noise, speed, doubt, we may have forgotten how to listen. Listening to God requires presence, surrender, courage. Because sometimes his words dismantle what we thought we knew, and at the same time, restore what we truly are. God is not dead. He is simply waiting for our silence, for our listening, for our courage to remember.